Don't you dare touch them again! The voice was thunder, sharp, final, echoing through the marble halls of the Belmont mansion like judgment itself. Flower dust danced in the air, caught in a frozen moment. 3 little faces turned pale. A wooden spoon clattered to the floor. And standing there in the doorway, framed by the morning light and rage, was Alexander Belmont, billionaire, widower, father, and man of absolute control. He had come home early, unannounced. For a second, Amara couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled where they hovered over a tray of cookie dough. She hadn't heard the front door open. The children, Ava, Liam, and Noah, had begged her for baking time. She thought she had enough before anyone noticed. But now, he was here. Alexander looked nothing like the smiling portraits that hung in the corridor. His jaw was clenched, veins visible along his temple. His tailored navy coat clung to his shoulders, flecked with raindrops. Those blue eyes, piercing, unblinking, locked onto her like she'd committed treason. The silence was unbearable. Ava whimpered first. "Daddy, we were just—" "Enough," he snapped, the single word slicing the air. "Go upstairs, all of you." The triplets froze, eyes darting between their father and Amara. She tried to speak, voice small but steady. "Sir, please. It was just flour." "Flour?" His lip curled. "Look at my kitchen. Look at my children. Do they look like heirs to you, Miss Johnson? Or like street urchins?" The words hit harder than they should have. Amara flinched, but held her ground. Her pulse raced, but her voice, soft, trembling, still carried gentleness. "They were laughing, sir. They were just being children." That word seemed to infuriate him more. He stepped closer, the scent of rain and cologne cutting through the sweet air of cookies and vanilla. "You don't decide what my children need. You are here to clean, not to parent." Ava started crying. Liam tried to comfort her, but Noah's small voice broke through the tension. "But Miss Amara makes us happy." That stopped Alexander for half a second, just a second. His jaw twitched. Then he turned away, voice flat. "Upstairs, now." The children obeyed, slowly shuffling past him, shoulders shaking. Their laughter was gone. When they disappeared up the stairs, Amara's eyes followed them, guilt pressing heavy in her chest. Then she turned back to Alexander. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, sir," she said softly. "I only wanted them to—" "To what?" His tone hardened again. "Forget discipline? Forget who they are?" Her voice cracked. "To remember who they are, sir. They're not machines. They're just little hearts who miss their mother." The words hung there, raw, real. Alexander's breath caught for a moment, but pride came to his rescue. His mask slid back on. "You're dismissed for the evening." "Yes, sir." She bowed her head and stepped back, flour still clinging to her apron. When he turned and strode out of the kitchen, the echo of his footsteps was the only sound left. That night, Amara sat in her small servants' quarters tucked behind the west wing. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and rain. She stared at her hands, still dusted white, and thought of the way Ava's laughter had filled the kitchen just before he came in. It had sounded like sunlight. Now the house was silent again, the way he liked it. But upstairs, 3 little bodies tossed and turned in their beds. Ava clutched her doll close, whispering, "It wasn't her fault." In the east study, Alexander poured himself a glass of scotch. His reflection stared back from the dark window, sharp, cold, and alone. He tried to focus on the report spread before him, the contracts, the endless climb of his company's numbers, but his mind wouldn't let go of that. Kitchen scene, flour-covered faces, laughter that didn't belong in his rigid world. He had built this house on silence, but tonight, silence felt suffocating. His thoughts drifted, uninvited, to Clara, her gentle laugh, her insistence on bedtime stories. She had said once, "You can't buy their smiles, Alex. You have to earn them." He had rolled his eyes back then. Now the echo of her words pressed like guilt against his chest. He pushed the glass away and stood abruptly. Maybe he'd gone too far. Maybe. But she was the maid. She should have known boundaries. Still, why couldn't he stop seeing her face when she said, "They just needed to feel like kids again"? He exhaled sharply, trying to bury the thought. Down in the servants' wing, Amara wrote in her small notebook, the one she never showed anyone. Each page carried moments she didn't want to forget. The first time Liam smiled. The day Ava said thank you without prompting. Noah's habit of humming before bed. On this night's page, she wrote only one line. Sometimes, kindness feels like rebellion. Her heart ached. She had never meant to overstep, but when those children laughed, something inside her healed a little too. As she closed her eyes, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd keep her head low, she'd stay invisible, she couldn't afford to lose this job. But deep down, she knew things had shifted. The mansion wasn't as still as it used to be. Somewhere in its echoing heart, guilt had begun to whisper, and it carried her name. And upstairs, Alexander Belmont sat alone in his study, staring at the untouched scotch, while the sound of his daughter's quiet sobs crawled beneath the doors. He told himself it didn't matter, that order had been restored. But something about the silence that night didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. The next morning dawned gray over Belmont Estate. A sky heavy with rain and unspoken apologies. The mansion, usually a symphony of footsteps and low conversation, now carried an unfamiliar stillness. Even the staff whispered. Everyone knew what had happened the night before. The kitchen scene, the shouting, the humiliation. In the servants' quarters, Amara sat at the edge of her bed, her fingers working nervously at the hem of her uniform. She'd ironed it twice already, though it didn't need it. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. She'd thought about leaving, packing her small suitcase, disappearing before sunrise. But the thought of the triplets' faces stopped her. She couldn't abandon them like that. So she rose, tied her apron tight, and whispered a small prayer before stepping out into the echoing corridor. In the grand dining room, Alexander sat at the head of the table, reading the morning paper with mechanical precision. His coffee steamed beside him, untouched. His triplets sat across from him, 3 little silhouettes of grief. No laughter, no chatter, just the clink of spoons. Ava pushed her plate away. Liam stared blankly at his cereal. Noah kicked the leg of his chair, muttering something under his breath. "Sit properly," Alexander said sharply, not looking up. No one moved. He set the paper down, eyes flicking up at his children. "I said, where's Miss Amara?" Ava's voice was small but firm. Alexander froze. "She's working," he said curtly. "You'll see her later." But Ava wasn't convinced. "You were mean to her." That struck deeper than he expected. He took a slow breath, trying to sound calm. "I was correcting her. That's my job as your father." Noah crossed his arms. "She's better at it." Alexander blinked. "What did you say?" The boy looked him right in the eye, voice trembling but brave. "She listens to us. You just shout." It was a knife, small but true. Alexander didn't respond. His throat felt tight. He turned back to the paper, but the words blurred. Downstairs, Amara busied herself in the lawn's dry room, folding towels she'd already folded twice. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Pennington, an older woman with sharp eyes softened by decades of service, stepped inside quietly. "Miss Johnson," she said gently, "word of advice. The master's in one of his moods. Keep to the shadows today." "Yes, ma'am," Amara murmured. Mrs. Pennington hesitated, studying her. "You've got a kind heart, dear. But kindness doesn't always survive in this house." Amara smiled faintly. "Then I'll just have to be quiet about it." Mrs. Pennington chuckled sadly. "You remind me of his wife. She had your same stubborn gentleness." Amara's eyes widened a little. "Mrs. Belmont?" The older woman nodded. "Oh yes, sweet as spring tea. But when she passed—" She sighed, glancing upward toward the main hall. He locked himself away, heart first. Their eyes met. Nothing more needed to be said. Later that day, Amara carried fresh linens up the grand staircase. As she reached the second floor, a small voice called out, "Miss Amara!" Ava came running down the hall, her little curls bouncing, her face brightening at the sight of her. "Ava, sweetheart," Amara whispered, kneeling. "You shouldn't be running in the halls." "I don't care," Ava said fiercely, throwing her arms around her neck. "Daddy was mean to you." Amara froze. She gently stroked the girl's hair. "Shh. Your father just wants what's best for you." "He doesn't smile anymore," Ava murmured. Not since Mommy went to heaven. Amara's throat tightened. That's hard, baby. But maybe he just forgot how. The child nodded, her voice muffled against Amara's shoulder. Can you teach him? Amara managed a soft laugh. I can try. It was a promise she didn't mean to make, and one Alexander would soon overhear. Because standing at the end of the corridor, unnoticed, was Alexander Belmont himself. He had stepped out of his office to take a call and ended up frozen there, listening. W's. Atching. The sight of his daughter, the one who hadn't hugged him in months, wrapped so tightly around the maid's arms, sent something strange twisting in his chest. Jealousy? Guilt? He didn't know. When Ava ran back toward her room, Amara rose, finally noticing him. Her breath caught. Sir. He didn't speak for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Finally he said, The children seem attached to you. I'm sorry if that's inappropriate, sir, she said quietly. He hesitated. No, it's surprising, that's all. They stood there in a charged silence. The air between them thickened with unspoken things. Regret, defensiveness, curiosity. Alexander broke it with his usual retreat. Carry on. Yes, sir. She watched him walk away, his posture as straight and cold as the marble beneath their feet. But as he turned the corner, she could have sworn she saw his hand tremble, just slightly, before he hid it in his pocket. That night, as a storm gathered outside, Alexander found himself wandering. The mansion's corridors seemed too quiet. He paused at the door of the nursery, half expecting laughter, but it was dark. He stepped inside. The nightlight glowed softly against the walls. On the floor lay a crayon drawing, messy, but clear. 4 figures, 3 small, 1 tall. Beneath them, scrawled in uneven handwriting, me, Liam, Noah, Miss Amara. No father. Alexander sank slowly to one knee. He stared at the drawing for a long time, the thunder outside echoing the ache in his chest. He didn't know when it happened, when the warmth had vanished from his home, when discipline had replaced affection. He picked up the drawing, folded it gently, and slipped it into his pocket. The storm raged on outside, but in his chest, a quieter one began. The next few days crawled by with uneasy quiet. The Belmont mansion, once a fortress of routine, now felt divided between 2 worlds, the cold corridors where Alexander paced alone, and the warm corners where Amara's soft voice still dared to hum bedtime songs for children who had forgotten how to sleep without comfort. But things could not stay balanced for long. Not when pride still ruled the halls. It started one Friday morning during breakfast. The triplets had grown bold enough to smile again, sneaking giggles as Amara served pancakes shaped like hearts. They'd begged her for it after finishing their homework early. She hesitated, knowing it wasn't appropriate. But how could she deny the 3 little faces that looked so much like her late brother when he was small? Ava giggled when Amara drizzled syrup into a smiley face. Look, Liam, it's you. Liam laughed. Noah clapped. And for the briefest, most fragile moment, the house felt alive again. Then Alexander walked in. His expression froze the air. His tie was flawless. His tone was ice. What, he said slowly, is happening here? The children's laughter died instantly. Amara turned, hands clasped in front of her apron. Good morning, sir. The children were just having breakfast. Breakfast? He interrupted, stepping closer, eyes narrowing at the table. With syrup everywhere? On their clothes? On the floor? It was an accident, sir. I'll clean it up. His voice rose a notch, sharp and humiliating. Do you even understand what this house represents, Miss Johnson? Discipline, structure, not whatever this is. He gestured at the messy table as though it were an insult carved into marble. Ava's lip trembled. Liam slid off his chair and hid behind Amara's skirt. Sir, please, Amara said softly. They've been studying so hard. They just wanted a moment to— I don't pay you to decide what my children want, Alexander barked. I pay you to keep order. The entire staff froze. Even Mrs. Pennington, standing near the door, lowered her eyes. Amara's voice was barely audible. Yes, sir. But then Ava's voice, trembling, brave, broke the silence. You're being mean again, Daddy. Alexander blinked. The little girl pushed her chair back, tears spilling. "You always yell at Miss Amara. She's the only one who makes us happy." Her brothers clung to her arms, crying too. "Don't send her away, Daddy!" The room shattered with sound. Amara dropped to her knees, holding the children close. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered. "Daddy's just upset. It's not your fault." Her words were gentle, but they struck Alexander like a blade. He turned away, trying to gather his composure. His throat felt tight, his face flushed with something more dangerous than anger: shame. But the eyes of his staff, the weight of his authority, forced him to armor himself again. "You're dismissed," he said coldly, still facing away. "Pack your things. You're done here." The words fell heavy. Amara froze. "Sir, please, don't do this in front of them." But Alexander didn't answer. He simply walked out, leaving behind silence, tears, and 3 small children who now looked at him as if he were a stranger. By afternoon, the mansion felt like a tomb. Amara packed her modest belongings, a few dresses, her notebook, and a photo of her brother, into a worn brown suitcase. Mrs. Pennington stood at the doorway, wringing her hands. "Child, I am so sorry," the older woman whispered. Amara smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "It's not your fault, ma'am. Maybe I should have known better. Maybe I was too much." Mrs. Pennington shook her head. "No, dear, you were exactly what this house needed. But men like him, they confuse power with protection." Amara swallowed hard. "I'll be fine." The older woman reached into her apron pocket and pressed something into Amara's hand, a small, delicate brooch shaped like a bird. "Mrs. Belmont used to wear it when she read to the children. Maybe it'll bring you luck." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. "Thank you." As she stepped into the corridor with her suitcase, she heard small footsteps pattering behind her. "Miss Amara!" The triplets ran toward her, faces red and wet with tears. Ava clung to her leg. Liam's tiny fists hit her skirt. Noah sobbed uncontrollably. "Please don't go," Ava cried. "We'll tell Daddy to stop." Amara knelt, hugging them tightly, memorizing their warmth. "Oh, my loves. You have to be brave, okay? Sometimes grown-ups forget how to listen. But one day, he'll remember." Noah sniffled. "Will you come back?" Amara smiled sadly. "If you promise to keep laughing, that's how you'll find me again." They didn't understand, but they nodded. Ava whispered, "We love you." Amara closed her eyes, whispering, "I love you too." She rose, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the servants' entrance. The sound of their cries followed her all the way out. From the balcony above, Alexander watched. He hadn't meant to. He told himself he was only ensuring she actually left. But the sight of her small figure walking down the rain-soaked driveway pierced something deep and unguarded. Ava's sobs echoed up the stairwell. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt hollow. That night, the mansion was silent again, the kind of silence he once prized. But now, it felt wrong. Dinner sat untouched. The children refused to come downstairs. Even the walls seemed to absorb the grief. Alexander sat in the dark study, glass of whiskey in hand. But the silence didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like punishment. On his desk lay a piece of paper he hadn't noticed before, a note folded neatly. In Amara's careful handwriting, "Sir, please don't be angry with them. They only wanted to feel loved. Thank you for letting me care for them, even for a short while." His eyes blurred. For a man who built empires, he suddenly realized how much he had destroyed in his own home. The rain hammered harder against the windows. He sat there, motionless, until the amber in his glass turned cold. Upstairs, Ava whispered into the darkness, clutching her doll. "Miss Amara will come back. I know she will." And though no one answered her, somewhere deep inside the house, maybe even in Alexander's chest, a quiet part believed her. The storm that night refused to end. Rain lashed against the Belmont mansion like it was trying to wash away something buried deep. Pride, guilt, grief, everything that had built those cold walls. Alexander Belmont hadn't slept. He sat in his dark office, the only light a small lamp burning over the letter Amara had left behind. He'd read it 5 times already. Each word cut a little deeper. They don't need perfection, Mr. Belmont. They just need someone who remembers how to laugh. It was such a simple sentence, humble even, but to him, it felt like a verdict. He'd thought control was the only thing holding his world together, but what if control was the very thing breaking it? Upstairs, the triplets refused to come out of their rooms. Their nanny reported that Ava had stopped speaking altogether, Noah had cried until he fell asleep, and Liam, usually quiet, had thrown his favorite toy soldier across the room. Alexander had shouted at the nanny to handle it, but the truth was, he didn't know how to handle himself. By dawn, the scotch bottle was empty, and so was his chest. Morning brought no relief. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, his footsteps echoing against marble floors that used to gleam with pride. Everywhere he looked, there were traces of her. Amara's touch in the folded blankets, the little paper cranes she'd made to entertain the children, the scent of cinnamon she'd somehow left behind in the kitchen. Mrs. Pennington found him there, standing in front of the cold oven, staring at a half-cleaned baking tray. "Sir," she said carefully, "the children haven't eaten much since yesterday." "I'm aware," he said quietly. "They're waiting for her," she added. "We all are." His eyes flicked up, sharp, though the exhaustion dulled the usual menace. "That's enough, Mrs. Pennington." The older woman hesitated, then sighed. "With respect, sir, I've worked in this house for 23 years. I've seen this mansion through weddings, funerals, and a lifetime of cold dinners. But I've never seen your children smile until she came." Her words struck him harder than she knew. He didn't respond. He couldn't. She left him standing there, alone in the silence he once demanded, a silence now suffocating him from the inside. That afternoon, Alexander tried to distract himself with work. Contracts, mergers, quarterly projections. All the noise that once defined his identity. But the numbers blurred on the screen. Every call felt hollow. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering over a contact that wasn't there. He didn't even have her number. The realization hit him harder than he expected. He'd fired the one person who understood his children, who had softened their world without asking for anything in return. And he hadn't even cared enough to learn her number. For the first time in years, Alexander felt small. He closed the laptop and stood abruptly. His reflection in the dark window was a stranger. Perfect suit, perfect hair, hollow eyes. He grabbed his coat. "Driver," he called out as he descended the stairs. "Get the car, now!" The city was gray and restless under the rain. He didn't even know where to begin. All he knew was that she'd mentioned something once. Something about a community center where she volunteered on Sundays. It was all he had to go on. For hours, he drove through streets he hadn't seen in years. The kind that didn't have marble sidewalks or security gates. People walked under umbrellas, children ran barefoot through puddles, and laughter, raw and unfiltered, filled the air. It was life, real life, something he'd forgotten existed. When he finally found the building, a small brick structure with a faded sign that read Riverside Hope Center, he almost didn't believe it. Through the window, he saw her. Amara Johnson. She was surrounded by children, her sleeves rolled up, her curls loose now instead of pinned. She was showing them how to bake bread using an old oven that barely worked. Her laugh, warm, unguarded, filled the air. For a moment, Alexander couldn't move. He felt something twist painfully in his chest. Regret, longing, awe. He stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled softly. A few heads turned, but Amara didn't notice him at first. She was kneeling beside a little boy, helping him measure flour with gentle patience. Then she looked up, and froze. The room fell quiet. Her eyes widened just slightly. "Mr. Belmont." He swallowed hard. "Miss Johnson." The children sensed the tension and backed away, whispering. I came to speak with you," he said, voice lower than usual, stripped of command. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "About what?" He hesitated, glancing at the children who were watching from behind the counter. "Perhaps outside?" She nodded once and led him to the small courtyard behind the center. The rain had eased into a mist. The air smelled of wet earth and baked bread. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander said, quietly, "I owe you an apology." Amara's expression was unreadable. "You don't owe me anything, sir. You owe them." He nodded, looking down. "You're right, I failed them, and you." "You didn't fail," she said softly. "You just forgot." He looked up, meeting her eyes. Those calm, steady eyes that had once looked down in fear, now full of quiet strength. Forgot what? What love looks like when it isn't earned through control. The words hit like rain on dry soil. He blinked, trying to keep his composure. "I thought I was protecting them, but I was just protecting myself." Amara's voice softened. "Grief makes us build walls. But children can't grow behind walls, Mr. Belmont. They need gardens." He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I tore theirs apart." "You can still rebuild it," she said. He shook his head. "Not without you." Her breath caught. "Sir." He lowered his gaze. "Amara, I was wrong. About everything. About you." And then, in a moment that no one would have believed if they hadn't seen it, Alexander Belmont, the billionaire who commanded boardrooms and empires, dropped to his knees in the mud. Amara gasped, stepping back. "Mr. Belmont, please." But his voice broke. "Please forgive me. I've been cruel, not just to you, to my own children. I don't deserve their love or yours, but I can't live another day knowing I drove you away." Rain began to fall again, soft and relentless. Amara's eyes shimmered, torn between anger and compassion. "You don't need to kneel for me," she whispered. "Just go home and be the father they deserve." He looked up at her, eyes glistening. "I can't do that without you." And then, as if the heavens themselves had been holding their breath, a small voice broke the silence behind them. "Daddy?" They both turned. The triplets stood in the doorway of the center, soaked from the rain, clutching each other's hands. Ava's voice trembled. "We followed you." Alexander's composure cracked entirely. He opened his arms without thinking, and the children ran to him, crying. He fell to his knees again, wrapping them close, whispering, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Amara stood frozen, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. And in that small courtyard, surrounded by rain, forgiveness, and the sound of 3 children laughing through tears, the coldest man in the city finally began to thaw. The morning after the storm broke with hesitant sunlight, soft and golden, like a peace offering from the heavens. The world outside the mansion was quiet. Dew clung to the hedges, birds began to return to their branches, and the sound of the city waking seemed distant, almost unreal. Inside, though, something had changed, something invisible yet unmistakable. For the first time in years, the Belmont mansion smelled like breakfast, real breakfast. Not the sterile perfection of a chef's menu, but something warm and human. Pancakes slightly uneven in shape, scrambled eggs that smelled like butter instead of precision, and laughter, fragile, uncertain laughter, echoing faintly through the hallways. Amara stood by the kitchen counter, flipping a pancake while Liam stood on a stool beside her, handing her the spatula. Ava was mixing fruit in a bowl, and Noah, determined to help, was watching the toaster like it was a magic trick. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching. He hadn't asked her to come back. She hadn't promised to stay. But after that night at the community center, after the rain and the tears and the unspoken forgiveness that hung in the air, she'd returned quietly, not as an employee, not as a maid, but as a friend who refused to let 3 children wake up to emptiness again. When she turned and saw him, she smiled faintly. "Good morning, Mr. Belmont." He shook his head, stepping forward. "Alexander," he corrected gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "Good morning, Alexander." The way she said his name, soft, deliberate, struck something inside him. He walked to the table where the children were setting plates, unsure what to do with his hands. It had been so long since he'd been part of something simple. "Daddy?" Ava said suddenly, her voice timid but hopeful. "Can you sit with us?" He blinked, as if she'd offered him something precious. Of course. He sat, The children gathered around him, chattering softly, passing him pancakes with syrup dripping on the table. He didn't care. He just watched them, really watched them, the way he never had before. Amara poured coffee for him and set the cup by his hand. Their fingers brushed. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "Thank you," he murmured. "You're welcome," she replied, her eyes lowering. For a long moment, the world felt almost right. Later that day, Alexander met with the nanny and staff in his office. It wasn't the usual scene of stern orders and clipped tones. Instead, he spoke quietly, earnestly. "Things are going to change," he said. "I know I've made it difficult to work here. That ends today. From now on, this house is a home, not a museum." The staff exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Pennington smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Yes, sir." He nodded, dismissing them, but as they filed out, he stopped her. "Mrs. Pennington," he said softly, "thank you for telling me the truth when I didn't want to hear it." She smiled. "It's never too late to start listening, sir." When she left, he turned toward the window and saw Amara in the garden with the children, their laughter floating through the air like sunlight. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest. Not the hollow ache of grief, not the restless hunger of ambition. Hope. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in gold and violet, he found Amara sitting by the fountain in the courtyard. She didn't notice him at first. Her hands were folded in her lap, her gaze far away. He approached quietly. "You're thinking about leaving." She startled slightly, then sighed. "You always did see straight through me." He sat beside her, not too close, but near enough that he could feel her warmth in the cool evening air. "Why?" "Because this isn't my world, Alexander," she said softly. "I came here to work, not to fix what was broken." He looked down at his hands. "Maybe not, but you did." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "You don't need me anymore. They have you now." He met her gaze. "They do, but I don't." Silence. The fountain gurgled softly between them. Amara looked away. "Alexander." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. You changed everything. I don't even recognize the man I was before you walked into this house." Her eyes shimmered, reflecting the fountain light. "That man loved his children. He just forgot how to show it." He chuckled, low and weary. "And you reminded me." She stood slowly, brushing her hands on her skirt. "Then my work here is done." He rose too, the words catching in his throat. "At least stay for dinner. The children—" "I will," she said softly, "but only because Ava asked me to teach her how to make cinnamon rolls." He smiled. "Cinnamon, of course." For a fleeting moment their eyes met. Two souls standing on the thin line between gratitude and something deeper, something neither dared name. That night, the mansion glowed with a warmth that hadn't touched its halls in years. The children laughed. Amara baked. Alexander poured tea instead of whiskey and found himself smiling when flour ended up on his suit. When the children went to bed, he lingered by the kitchen doorway, watching Amara clean up. "You know," he said softly, "they'll never forget you." She turned, her expression wistful. "That's enough for me." He hesitated. "And what if I can't forget you either?" She froze, breath catching. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, raw, real. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. He looked at her like a man standing at the edge of redemption. "Then I'll just have to prove I can." Outside, the wind carried the scent of cinnamon and rain through the open window. A sign, perhaps, that the storm had passed, but the story wasn't done. Not yet. The invitation went out quietly. Handwritten notes placed on the silver trays that morning. Dinner tonight. Formal. Attendance required. A.B. The staff whispered in the hallways, confused. No one could remember the last time Alexander Belmont had invited everyone, maids, gardeners, chefs, chauffeurs, to sit at the same table as him. Even the children seemed uncertain. Ava asked Amara at breakfast, "Is Daddy mad again?" Amara smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. I think he wants to say something." She wasn't sure what, but she could feel it in the air. A shift, fragile and trembling, like a melody about to resolve. By evening, the mansion was glowing. Candles flickered on long tables draped in white linen. Silver cutlery gleamed beneath chandeliers. The triplets sat side by side at the center, fidgeting with nervous excitement. And then, Alexander appeared. He looked different tonight. The sharp angles of power were still there. The tailored black suit, the watch that cost more than a car. But his expression had softened. The hardness in his eyes had melted into something human. As he reached his seat at the head of the table, the chatter stilled. The staff stood frozen, unsure whether to sit. Alexander looked around, his voice steady but low. "Please, sit." They obeyed hesitantly. For a few moments, the only sounds were clinking glasses and soft footsteps. Then, he stood again, clearing his throat. "I asked you all here tonight because I owe you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." Every head turned toward him. "I built this house to be perfect, controlled, silent. I thought order was love, that structure could replace warmth. And in doing so, I destroyed the one thing that made it a home." His gaze flicked briefly toward the three small faces staring at him, eyes wide and shining. "I've been unfair to my children," he continued, his voice tightening. "And worse, I've been unfair to the people who've cared for them in ways I couldn't." He looked directly at Amara. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to stop breathing. "I humiliated you," he said quietly. "In front of my children, my staff, and myself. You did nothing wrong. You brought light into this house when I was too proud to see it. You gave my children what I could not: laughter, warmth, and love." Amara's lips parted slightly. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but she didn't speak. He took a breath, steady but heavy. "So tonight, in front of everyone, I need to say this. I was wrong." Gasps rippled around the table. Even Mrs. Pennington wiped at her eyes discreetly. Alexander continued, his voice growing rough. "When I lost Clara, I thought the world ended. I became a ghost inside my own home. But you, Amara, you reminded me that my children still needed a father, and I'm ashamed that it took me so long to see that." Silence fell like a prayer. Then Ava stood up, small, trembling, but brave. "Daddy," she whispered, "can Miss Amara stay with us? Forever?" Liam and Noah nodded eagerly. Amara's throat tightened. She looked at Alexander, the once cold man now standing vulnerable before his own creation, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He smiled faintly at his daughter, then looked back at Amara. "That's not for me to decide anymore," he said. "It's for her." Her breath caught. The children looked at her hopefully, eyes wide and shimmering. She glanced around, at the faces of staff she'd grown to care for, at the family she'd come to love, at the man who'd once been her employer, and now seemed something far more complicated. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly. "But I'm not going anywhere tonight." Ava cheered. Liam clapped. Noah shouted. She said yes. Laughter filled the air. Real laughter. The kind that carried warmth into every corner of the house. Alexander smiled for the first time in years. Not the polished, distant smile of a billionaire, but something genuine, unguarded. "Then we celebrate," he said. "To family. The kind we choose and the kind we fight to keep." Glasses lifted. The clinking sound echoed through the great hall like a benediction. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the children had fallen asleep, Amara found herself standing by the window of the quiet dining room. The candles had burned low. The last traces of laughter still floated in the air. She didn't hear Alexander approach until he spoke. "I never thought I'd see this house full again." She turned. He stood in the doorway, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, looking exhausted and oddly peaceful. "It was always full," she said softly. "You just couldn't hear it." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she replied. "But it's simple." He studied her for a long moment. I meant what I said earlier, Amara. You don't belong behind anyone's orders. Not mine. Not anyone's. Her eyes softened. Then what am I, Alexander? He hesitated, then reached out. Not to touch, but to hold her gaze. Someone I don't want to lose again. The air between them thickened, electric but tender. For the first time, she didn't look away. I'm not sure what that means, she whispered. Neither am I, he admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. A faint smile curved her lips. You're learning fast, Mr. Belmont. He chuckled, shaking his head. Alexander, he corrected again, and this time she said it, softly, like a secret. Alexander. Outside, the rain began to fall again, not the cold, angry kind that had once marked their first clash, but a gentle drizzle, steady and cleansing. And somewhere deep within the mansion, the ghosts of silence finally faded. But the story wasn't over yet, because even forgiveness has its tests. And the past, as gentle as it can grow, always has one final way of knocking at the door. Tomorrow, something, or someone, would come to test just how much Alexander and Amara had truly changed. The final reckoning was coming. It happened 2 weeks later. The Belmont mansion, once a fortress of silence, now hummed with life. The triplets ran through the hallways barefoot. Music played softly from the old gramophone in the study. Amara's laughter could sometimes be heard from the kitchen, light and low, blending with the clatter of dishes and children's voices. And Alexander, the man who once measured time in meetings and money, now measured it in minutes spent at the breakfast table, in bedtime stories read aloud, in the quiet joy of simply existing with them. He'd begun to live again. But peace, as life often reminds us, never arrives without being tested. The knock came on a Thursday morning, firm, cold, the kind of knock that carries the past behind it. Amara was the one who opened the door. On the front step stood a woman, tall, immaculate, wrapped in a white trench coat despite the spring warmth. Platinum hair swept back from a sharp, familiar face. A designer bag hung on her arm, and when she looked up, her eyes were a mirror of Alexander's, blue and unforgiving. "Hello," she said smoothly. "You must be the maid." Amara's pulse stuttered. Yes, can I help you?" The woman's gaze swept the grand foyer, the toys scattered near the staircase, the faint scent of cinnamon still lingering from breakfast. "Tell Alexander his sister has come home." When Alexander walked into the foyer minutes later, his expression faltered. "Victoria." "Alexander." She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "So, the rumors were true." He stiffened. "What rumors?" She arched a perfect eyebrow. "That you've turned my late sister-in-law's house into a daycare, and that the help has taken over your heart." Amara's cheeks burned. "Enough," Alexander said, his tone sharper now. "Don't talk about her like that." "I'm not talking about her," Victoria said, eyes flicking toward Amara. "I'm talking about this. This woman playing mother to your children, my nieces and nephew." The words hit the air like acid. Amara took a quiet breath. "Mrs. Belmont, with respect, I've done nothing but care for them. You will not address me," Victoria cut in coldly. "You are staff." The old Alexander might have let that slide, might have even agreed, but not this one. He stepped closer to his sister, voice low but dangerous. "She's family." Victoria laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "Family? Alexander, have you lost your mind? She's a maid, a hired hand. Do you have any idea what people are saying? The press? The board?" "I don't care about the board," he snapped. "Of course you don't. You're too busy playing house with your children's nanny." Her voice echoed through the hallways, sharp enough to make Ava peek from behind the staircase, eyes wide and frightened. "Stop it," Amara said softly, stepping forward. "Please. The children." Victoria whirled on her. "You will not tell me what to do in my own family's home." Before Alexander could react, a small voice broke through the tension. "Miss Amara is our family." All heads turned. Ava stood at the top of the stairs, trembling, but fierce. Liam and Noah stood beside her, eyes shining with unshed tears. "She tucks us in," Ava said, voice cracking. "She makes us pancakes and tells us about Mama when we miss her. She makes Daddy laugh again." Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ava's chin trembled. "You don't even visit us. You just send cards. She's the one who stayed." Silence, the kind that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Alexander's throat tight. "Ned." He turned to Victoria, his voice breaking with quiet steel. "You heard her. That's the truth." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then her gaze flicked to Amara again, searching, uncertain. "I came here because I thought you'd lost control," she said finally. "But maybe you just found something I never did." Her eyes softened, just barely. "I'll be at the hotel if you need me." And with that, she turned and left, her heels clicking sharply against the marble before fading into silence. That night, Alexander stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The storm had passed again, but its echo lingered in his chest. Amara joined him quietly, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "She wasn't wrong," she said softly. "You did lose control." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's exactly what I needed." She leaned against the railing, the wind tugging gently at her curls. "Your sister's proud. Maybe she just needs time." "She'll come around," he said. "They always do, when the truth refuses to hide." For a moment they stood in silence, the city glowing beneath them. Then he turned to her. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "I used to think love was something you built, something you could manage, like a company. But it's not." "No?" she asked, her eyes catching the moonlight. He shook his head. "It's something you surrender to, like faith." Her breath hitched. "Alexander." He took her hand, finally, fully. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like. But whatever it is, I want you here, not as the maid, not as the help, but as the woman who saved us." Her heart fluttered. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything." For the first time, she didn't fight it, didn't hide behind duty or doubt. She let herself feel it. The warmth of his hand, in hers, the soft night air, the fragile, beautiful truth that they had both come too far to go back. Below them, the children's laughter echoed faintly from the garden, a sound of pure, unguarded joy. And as Alexander drew her closer, the city lights shimmered like stars that had come down to witness a quiet kind of miracle. The billionaire who once lived in silence had learned to listen. The maid who once feared her own worth had found her voice. And three little hearts, the triplets who began it all, finally had a home full of love, laughter, and life. No grand declarations, no fairy tale ending, just truth, hard-earned, imperfect, and real. The kind that lasts.